how do you decide when information is reliable, right? You know, there was that Kenyan birth certificate for Obama that was circulating on the internet, you know, and it took, and lots of people still believe it to be true. And but at the same time, within 24 hours, people had completely broken it down, discredited it, and built tools where you can make your own Kenyan birth certificate. so this is the kind of world we're living with, constant struggles over truth claims. And how do we sort those out? And you can't rely on traditional gatekeepers to do it. Next slide, please. Then the question of ownership and authorship. When, you know, how do you deal with intellectual property? What's the lines between fair use and copyright protection in a world where, again, about a third of young people have remixed content produced by someone else in the process of making their media? These numbers suggest that we're in a world where creativity involves building on the culture around us, and the law is totally ambiguous about most of the dimensions of that. It's unexplored territory, so young people at least have to know when they're taking risks and what kinds of risks they're taking as they deal with this new space. All right, next slide, please. So what about politics in this society? Well, a guy named Robert Putnam tells us in the 1950s, American politics was organized around the bowling league, right? And the idea is that the people gathered together on Friday nights, they bowled, lots of downtime, you're sitting in the back benches, you're talking to people in your community, and out of that came a sense of social ties that shaped the political experience. Bowling alley is an example for him, but his book, Bowling Alone, uses the kind of emblematic example of a world of strong social ties in the local community. So what are we doing when we play World of Warcraft? If we go to the next slide. It's not exactly bowling alone, and I would suggest that the guild structure that young people are involved with when they play these games are part of a new kind of community life, with one that's not as geographically rooted as it was before, right? That this is, many of the same things that took place in the bowling alley are taking place through these communities. One reason these games are so addictive is people feel a sense of social obligation to the group. The group's facing an upcoming battle, you've got to be there to contribute, and there's the notions of leadership that emerge there. There's a kind of social dynamic that we need to understand better before we say, oh, this is just a waste of time, and bowling was the center of our social life. That, we're just talking about games in both cases, just games played in different kinds of communities and different kinds of spaces. So next slide. So when I was in Chile recently, I met this guy who's a national senator in Chile who runs workshops for global leaders to try to get them to play World of Warcraft because he thinks this is a laboratory for new kinds of leadership which allow people to interface around the world without regard to geographic grounding. And he thinks there's a source of power for the developing world and Latin America as it looks toward its future to connect via virtual worlds. It's a very interesting set of arguments. We go to click it again. Read the second part of this quote here. So his vision is that things like World of Warcraft are really about worlds and about a global world distribution of power and skills, and could play an important role in shaping the political future of our planet. Kind of interesting, food for thought. So we're going to next. So I'm interested increasingly in how politics works in this new environment. Here's a story, this illustrates a story a woman in Australia shared with me, and she was telling the story of a local, people started taking pictures of Brisbane and putting them on Flickr. And then they decided, well, we're all taking pictures of the same city, maybe we should get together sometime and take pictures and form camera clubs, right? And so they had meetups and socially connected. And as they started taking pictures of the city, they started seeing problems in their local community. And as they saw the problems in the local community, they began to use the photographs to call it to the attention of other people. And in the process of doing it, they became a civic organization as well as a camera club and pushed to get those problems fixed in their local community. So this process of moving from a platform that allowed you to share photographs, the social network tools that allowed you to get together, the tools that allowed you to publicize your concerns, pulled them from a hobby group into a civic group. And we're seeing those kinds of breaking down of barriers happening again and again as we look at the social and political structures of our time. Next slide, please. This is happening around the world, right? I hear a lot of grumbling about more young people voted for American Idol than voted in the last presidential election. Technically not true, by the way, because you can vote as many times as you want for American Idol. And if we all had speed dial on our phones in the last election, there would be a lot more election votes counted for the candidates of our choice. So it's not fair. But this in China is interesting. Pop Idol in China generated massive discussions because it was one of the first times the average Chinese were entitled to vote for more than one candidate. Right? Think about what it is to be in a dictatorship and to get to vote over candidates, and it awakened the discussion about democracy. Next slide, please. This is a picture of a rally around Pop Idol in India, the Indian variation of American Idol, where there was a regional candidate who generated massive public outpourings, and people were organizing to try to rally votes for Indian Idol, again in the struggle, political struggle. So when Pop Idol and American Idol models democracy, it may be the most serious content, but we often acquire through play the skills that we're going to apply in more serious forms later. And so something's very interesting about this sort of shift and who gets to decide the outcome of events on television. That's another site where political awareness is taking place. We're going to the next slide. This is a group called the HP Alliance, which is one of my favorite examples of this new style of politics. It's for the Harry Potter Alliance. Right, and the HP Alliance has organized more than 100,000 young people around the world to work on human rights issues.
Wow.
Right, and they did it by sort of arguing that this is the fantasy you're invested in is the story of a young man who saw evil in his society, organized his classmates into Dumbledore's army, and went on and changed the world. So if you formed the Dumbledore army on our planet, what would you try to change? And that very simple proposition woke the imagination of young people. And the books are read because of struggles about prisoner rights, media distortion, bureaucratic manipulation, and particularly the human rights agenda, which J.K. Rowling worked for Amnesty International before she wrote those books. There is woven through it a notion of a world that's not about injustice. Injustice to people who are different, werewolves in the closet. After all, Harry Potter is literally raised in a closet in his parents, under the stairs in his home. The sense, and so they've been involved in Darfur, as you see here. If we go to the next slide. There they were involved. They've been involved in the struggles over equal marriage rights and so forth. Recently in Maine, they organized a competition of the four houses: the Slytherin, the Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw, to see who could get the most voters out to vote on some of the propositions that were on the ballot in Maine. So there's a lot of interesting ways that pop culture is infusing the political life of young people in ways that don't look like politics as usual, that bring politics out of the kind of polishy, wonkish language of inside the Beltway, Washington, and brings it back into the life world of young people for whom politics becomes a lifestyle, not a special event, something they're involved with on an ongoing basis. Go, next slide. We see a lot of that, the YouTube being used as a platform for all kinds of political speech in the last election. The snowman video, by the way, from the CNN snowman debate was made by young people, a group of teenagers in Minnesota who produced this video, and it started out just doing goofing off videos, sort of black comedy videos, and then turned that into a video for the debate, and then went on to make a series of pro-environmental videos that were distributed through YouTube that built on the popularity and visibility the snowman gained at the early phases of the campaign. Next slide. Augmented reality games are large-scale information scavenger hunts that require teams to work together to solve complex problems. And what we're discovering is that as people apply those skills in games, many of them are seeking out real-world problems they can apply the skills to, so that they're turning their attention to monitoring the federal budget, or looking at campaign finance reform, or whatnot. So this is, again, play that informs political life, that play that moves to civic life because of the availability of these platforms. So we go to the next slide. And here we see side by side two phenomena. One is a campaign to keep Chuck on the air, a television show. The other is a campaign to green the environment. So both of them use the exact same tactic, what's called a boycott. They organize their supporters, send them to a local merchant. In the case of Chuck, they went after Subway shops because Subway was a big sponsor of the series, and they all showed up on the same day, bought sandwiches, left a message saying, "Chuck sent me," and it changed. Subway reappraised its relationship with the series and pushed to have it renewed. Carrot Mob gets they get local merchants to bid on who will put the largest percentage of their profits on a given day to greening the store. And then they smart mob people into buy stuff from the store, so the store benefits and grows. Talked to a woman at the University of Chicago who studies black youth, and she says more black young people in America today have been involved in boycotts than were involved in boycotts. So we think of boycotts as the emblem of the civil rights era African American community. It's being swapped out with new kinds of citizenship that's shaped by the digital world, that's about applying our collective skill as consumers to transform the landscape that we live in.